Reclaiming Timeless Ways, another episode underway with Mike Traister, myself, Simon Fuller, and another episode kind of piggybacking off of 2 weeks ago's episode that launched, and that is As God is My Witness, or As God is Mike's Witness, some different stories that have happened to him that they are truthful, as God is his witness.
Yes.
And just kind of fun. A lot of our last episode really focused on some real positive stories, Mike. And, you know, I'll interject my own observation, and that is, you know, this story, the show, this program all started from a meeting that was not purposeful. It was accidental, that turned into a 3-hour conversation with more than one cup of coffee, because 3 hours I drink more than one cup of coffee. And it was just sort of I want to see better. There's a lot of good out there, but there's also a lot of things that have corroded, in the last 50 years and beyond maybe. And so, how do we reclaim those timeless ways? And some of the stories you told last week, and I'm sure that you'll tell, or a couple weeks ago rather, and that you'll tell again, sort of are the positives of it, sort of the core of the essence of what you would love to see functioning society be.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to find out what's wrong before you can fix it.
Right.
Definitely. So I was living in Michigan.
Yep.
So we finally made it to Michigan. Then the motor didn't
So this
blow.
is literally picking off the last story.
Yeah. So I get this job in this machine shop. And they hire me as an apprentice. And I had done some other machining work. But this was a different kind of job. This was called precision hand scraping. So you have these very hard tools that look like files, but they're perfectly flat, and they have these perfect square edges. And some are flat, some are round. And it's to bring the specs of a machined part to a finer level than they could do with the machine.
Okay.
So what you would use a kind of a blue ink, and then these flat plates and various kind of micrometers to determine angles and distances. So things had to be perfectly flat, perfectly parallel, or at perfect perpendicular angles to each other. So that was my apprenticeship, and I was learning it very, very quickly for some reason. Just lucky. But so I'm at work one day. They got these big I-beams up on the ceiling, and on the I-beams there are these little, like, carts, the little wheeled mechanisms that have 4 steel wheels, and there's like a pulley with a cable, and you can pull up a machine that weighs several tons and just push it from one end of the shop to the other.
Okay.
So the little cart might be like that big, and the wheels would be like big old roller skate wheels.
Sure.
It's locked into the beam. So my boss and I are walking and talking about something, and I notice I'm out of the corner of my eye, and I look, and there's this about 4,000 or 5,000 pound milling machine, about 4 or 5 feet off the ground, so almost head level, and the cable is about that thick, and there's a notch cut out of it about 1/3 of the way through the cable, which makes it extremely lethally dangerous.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, "Forrest, look at that." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "Look at the cable, it's severely damaged." I said, that's could be deadly." And he looks at me and he goes, "What?" And I said, there's damage on that cable. It could, if there's some shock to it, or if even a couple of strands broke, it might start a whole process. Less strands, more stress, and the whole thing could tear, it could crush someone and destroy them. I said, "You'll just have a puddle of blood." And he looks at me and he says to me, "Do you like your job?" And I'm like, "Come on, Forrest, I'm serious. It could be you under that thing.
Right.
Your wife getting a call that Forrest is done." He was instantly crushed, and he's literally bled out all over the floor. His guts are all over the floor. I'm not exaggerating about this. Is like dropping a pickup truck 5 or 6 or 7 feet onto somebody. there'd be nothing left. So he looks at me again, and gets a dark look on his face, little guy, and he looks at me like this, very menacing, and he goes, "Do you like your job?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I do, but that's going to get somebody killed." He goes, something like, "Do you understand?" Right? He's basically threatening to shit can me. So I don't know what I said, but I know I was shocked and angry. So I started looking around the shop just at the things that I normally see. Like I've got a grinding wheel that I work on, and there's no faceplate. So it can throw things to your eyes.
Right.
And there's I think there was a dangerous, slippery area in front of it where you could fall. And I don't remember, there was some other safety issues. And I tried to bring it up to him, and he threatened my job again. So I called up the state. And I told them, and meanwhile I gave them my notice. And I go upstairs, the owner says he wanted to talk to me. And he goes, "I understand you're not happy here." And I said, "Well, I've been asking to be trained in something else because I've pretty much completed my training with my position." And he goes, "There's no other position." And he's like this real nasty little skinny old tyrant and talks like real rigid, sharp, and goes, "If you don't want to be here, we don't want you here." So he says, "That's all." So I figured, okay, so we're done. I'll finish my 2 weeks, and that's that. So I come back downstairs, and who do I see but Forrest, the guy that threatened my job. And he goes, "You have 5 minutes to leave, vacate the premises." And I'm expecting 2 weeks of work. And I'm like, I did you the responsible courtesy of giving you 2 weeks notice, and you're going to just cut me loose? He goes, "Yep, the boss doesn't want you here anymore." So I got a hold of the state, and I told them, I said, "There's some really unsafe circumstances down there." They said, "Well, what do you see?" And I told them, and they're like, "That sounds like a problem. So we'll send somebody down to inspect it." I said, "I'm new here, and I don't want trouble from these people. Does my name have to be on the report?" They said, "Nope, it doesn't." I said, "I'd rather it be left off."
Yeah.
So, because you don't want to come out and find all the windows gone on your car or no tires, So, anyway, I get a letter from them. They kept my record, but they didn't put my name. They had gone down there and they talked to the old buzzard upstairs. They did an inspection, and there was something like 180 safety violations.
Jeepers.
So apparently what I was looking at,
Just the surface.
yeah. And I had a friend there, and he was like Hoss Cartwright. Rich, I think was his name. Big guy. Just a sweet human being. I remember having lunch with him and his wife one day. He was like somebody from the 1800s. His word was good. He was generous and kind. He was their painter. And he didn't know it. They never gave him a mask. And he was developing a terminal lung disease working there for want of a mask, which I didn't know till years later. But so the inspector tells us, the guy looks at him, the old tyrant. He says, "Get the F off my property. This is my castle. I'm the king. You have no right to be here." The guy says, "Sir, I'm trying to help you solve the problem." He goes, "We don't want to go through a bunch of nasty stuff with you, but you got all these serious safety violations. You have to fix them. Somebody's going to get hurt." "No, I don't. Get out." So he hands him a notification of the violations, and he says, "You have 30 days to correct them." You can't come back on my premises. He goes, well, I beg to differ with you. And he says, at the end of 30 days, you'll have an uncontestable fine of $29,000. And then you will still have to fix all the damage. I don't know what happened. I mean, I think they had to pay the fine, but eventually they drove themselves out of business, which was sad, because there was a lot of really great old machining going on there. But it was a great place, but a rotten company.
Right.
And I think I like the government a little more than I do now, but not much.
Sure.
And but yeah, they're gone, and that they played a role in their own demise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess I had mixed feelings about that. Part of it was like, good, they got a boot up their ass and they deserved it, but the other part was, what a waste.
Yeah.
There's this place with all these people working, and they couldn't do better than that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, that guy, that big guy that worked there for 25, 30 years, his lungs were destroyed.
Sure.
He was, completely disabled, ruined. And he lived a decently long life, relatively speaking, but I'll bet you he would have had another 20 years of him.
And certainly quality was diminished.
Oh, boy, yeah. So that was one. When I was living, this is another story. I was living up there, and this is my first marriage. My ex was kind of a wild person. She had a lot of bad habits and bad friends. So we're visiting with some friends, some woman that had roomed with us for a while and then moved out with a boyfriend. So we're up in this other town, and they go out, and they're gone an hour, and they're gone 2 hours and 3 hours. And I look at this guy, and I said, something's wrong. Oh, they'll be okay. I said, no, something's wrong. So we get in his car. I had never been there before. No jack about the town. It's pitch black outside. It must be about 11 o'clock at night. It's cold. And this is like north central Michigan, near Lake Michigan. And it's winter. There's a lot of snow on the ground. We had 140-inch snow that year.
Wow.
And, yeah, which was a record. And so I don't know what's going on, but I'm like, go up that road and make a left, and go to the next corner and make a right. I have no idea why I'm saying this, right? And then I'm like, stop here. I'm like, I have no idea why I'm saying any of these things to him. And so I stop. There's this big old brick building. This is all I had built back then was big square brick buildings, right? And so I get out of the car and I go across the street. I go in this parking lot. There's a snowbank about 5 feet high, and she is face down in the snowbank, unconscious behind a bar. She would have died out there, And somebody had beat her up and thrown her in the snowbank. And so I put her in the hospital. But it was amazing. You hear stories about somebody moving 1,000 miles and their dog finds them.
Right.
It's that kind of thing. And it's
Yeah.
like, what is this radar that's in us that we're made with? We're created with that, just like the dog is, or a cat. And it's like, we can't describe it, we can't explain it, but it's real,
Right.
Have you ever had an experience like that?
Maybe not the exact
Right.
scenario, but, I guess I would call that, maybe in the world of miracles, God, that there are things that have been unexplainable in my life
Right.
to way too wild to be just a coincidence.
Not a coincidence.
You know, there are some things you
Right.
could maybe wrestle with in your brain. Was that just a coincidence? And then there are moments that it's like, no, there was a much higher being with me.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe,
And that's what I was imagining as you're telling me this. I
Yeah.
mean, you have no reason to know exactly where she is.
no. No, so is it God, is it the Holy Spirit, is it an angelic presence? Or do we have a whole series of other senses that we can't quantify yet?
Sure.
You know. There was a story I read once. They were working with shielding. Like there's a kind of a shield that they can create that protects the electronics from an electromagnetic pulse,
Okay.
right? So if you have, let's say this is a expensive radio. So you put it in this box, and I can't remember the name of this, but it's a Faraday cage, that's what it's called. So you put it in this cage, which is like copper wires that surround it, and it stops the EMP. So it protects the circuits which would otherwise be destroyed, right? And so they were doing this experiment. They put this Faraday cage in a room. So that they have this guy leave his dog, in an office in this building, and he walks around the building. The dog is fine, and he goes down a hall. Dog's fine. Goes in another room. Dog's fine. They put him in the Faraday cage and they turn it on. The dog goes berserk. He no longer is aware of whatever the electromagnetic signature of this man is. This man has, as far as the dog can sense, ceased to exist.
Yeah.
Flips out. Turn the cage off, bring him out, dog's quiet. Just like that. Right. It's remarkable. So it's like, I think we are about clueless about all of the senses that we know 5.
Right.
Or somebody's on a farm and all of a sudden they run outside and they run across a field and find their kid laying face down in a stream. There was no reason for them to run across that field.
Right.
Not that we can quantify. There was a reason.
Right.
Was it an angel? Maybe. Was it the Holy Spirit or God? Maybe. Or was it a different sense, like that dog with the cage?
Right.
I think we were wired a little more, with more complexity and power than we have any imagination. Our Creator was much more thorough than we can even begin to understand.
Yeah.
That's my belief. I've observed enough things to know it.
Yeah.
So that was another one. There's another story. We had this group that I helped to facilitate. I was doing some ministerial studies, and I got introduced to this gal that owned this fancy home in Monterey. And I wound up being her chauffeur and cook. She had a Rolls Royce, and I was her chauffeur. And it was kind of like jeans and a t-shirt, and just very relaxed, just simple food. So I lived there for a couple of years. Anyway, so I was invited to visit as a guest of this group. It was a therapy group for cancer patients. And it was run by a doc named Paul Hart, who did it for free. He was a psychiatrist originally from Connecticut. And we had a patient there. And eventually, after a couple months of being a guest there, he kept asking me to participate and ask questions and make suggestions. We would visit for hours afterwards. The group was hours, and then we would visit for hours and talk about it. He asked me to run the group, and I was scared shitless. Like, I don't know enough. I'm 25 years old. If you're fine, I'll be here. If you're drowning, I'll pull you out of the water. But I figured I was going to drown a lot. But we had this one guy. His name was Lotzi. He's long passed from this world. but he had a tumor in his lung. And he comes in one day and he's mad. He was a scientist. He was from Eastern Europe. And he goes, I'm really angry at myself. We're like, what's wrong? And he goes, I haven't been meditating properly. So this is visualization meditation built on the work of Carl Symington, another physician, where you saw your body destroying the tumor, all your immune cells killing it and then flushing itself clean. And he goes, I'm going to do it better. So we say, well, what happened? He goes, well, I went to the doctor and there was a spot on my lung, and he had been meditating and it was clear. And then he had this little dot like a pencil point. He was angry with himself because he got lazy. And so he comes back 2 weeks later and he says, the spot is gone. I'm like, that's fantastic. He says, yeah, my oncologist is really happy with me, so I'm going to keep meditating. So he does this. Well, I find out sometime later, he had made a statement. He said, I will fight this thing tooth and nail, but if it ever goes in my head, I quit, right? So they did this body scan on him one day for some reason. They found this little tiny tumor in his head, right? He quit. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Tumors don't grow that fast, right? But he gave up. And the minute that he gave up,
Right.
right? So it's like, the question is, the same question is, what is the power within us that we were created with? It's not what we think it is. It's like, there's a statement in the Bible, you're created in God's,
Image.
yeah,
Likeness. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like, well, have we ever really stopped and opened the window and looked outside and asked ourselves, or gone into a book or into our mind and said, what does that actually mean?
Right. You know, if we had a mustard seed worth of faith, we could move mountains.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's like, you know, I'm looking at this, right? This. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, God gave me this much, right? Well, maybe what he gave me is more, or you, more, and your wife and your kids, more than the Pacific Ocean,
Right.
literally, right? If we're made in God's likeness or image, what did he give us? What authority did he give us? In faith, right? The power does not originate in me, but it's been covenanted to me to
Right.
do good with it, right? And so here's this guy, and maybe he had 1,000-gallon tank, because he did much more than most people could imagine, right? But he also created a contract with a limit, right? And he said, I won't go beyond this point. If this thing happens, so there's this pencil point, you know, little dot, like 1/10 the size of a green pea, maybe. 2 weeks later, he says, I quit. No more meditating, I'm done. He's gone. It's like, wow. He had the power to restore himself and the power to give up
Right.
completely, you know? So I got one more story, and then I think we'll close this part of this. I think there might be a few more. When I lived in Northern California, I did a lot of running. Every 2 or 3 days or so, I'd go out and I'd run between 6 and 12 miles, once or twice more. And I would start on an extremely steep hill. It was like this nasty hill out on Main Street,
Yeah.
like that. And it was 3/4 of a mile up to start with. And it was brutal. And I'm not what you would call a gifted runner. So my accomplishments came at probably twice the work of the
Right,
opposite,
right.
average guy. And so I started playing these games in my head, just using my imagination. I asked myself, well, if I had a kite on my back and the wind was blowing uphill behind me, if I could just feel that, if that was actually happening, if I could picture it, if I could become immersed in that picture, not just say the words, right? Would it help? So I tried it, and it helped. It was less brutal, right? I was breathing hard, but not like dying.
Right.
Wheezing my last wheeze. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So the kite worked. And then I asked myself, well, you know these ski lifts? They
Yeah.
got like a cable and they get pulled up by the cable, right? So I asked myself, if I had like a thing on like a backpack with a big pulley, and they could pull me up with the pulley, if I could imagine that and immerse myself in it, I wonder if that would work. It's a different image, right? But the same thing of the effort coming from elsewhere, reducing my toil.
Right.
So I said, okay, I'll try it. So I immersed myself in that image, like watching a good movie. You don't see anything else. And it was, again, it was easier.
I'm thinking I want to imagine an escalator where I'm just standing there
Okay,
like,
yeah, right,
there's my running.
yeah.
Sorry.
So that would have been a great one. I love it. So if anybody is doing imagery for effort, I mean,
Yeah.
his escalator is every bit as good
Yeah.
as my stuff. So then I did one more, and I imagined that I was running downhill,
Okay.
right? So basically, when you're running downhill, you're trying just not to fall.
Right.
It was a nasty hill, and it was the same thing. And I don't remember which of the three worked the best, but they all helped me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like you could kind of, sort of imagine that it was a little bit better. It was a lot better.
Yeah.
So, this imagery for running, and again, I was not a gifted runner. I worked my ass off to make relatively humble improvements.
Yeah.
So that was amazing, and that will be the end of this one, I think.
End of episode 2 of As God is Mike's Witness. Just some fun stories with some nice little tips and tactics within it too. Always like to take a nugget or two, and hopefully you can apply it somewhere in your life or maybe a friend. Share it. We love if you'd share our videos. We do it for free, just to maybe inspire, help, guide, whatever it might be for you or somebody in your life. Till next episode, we wish you a fantastic day.
Thank you.